doing his radio show while stone deaf. You can say what you want about Rush Limbaugh, but it's a fact that arguably the most successful radio talk show host in the history of radio is 100% deaf. In fact, until he had his cochlear implant, he couldn't even hear what he was saying. He's recently been diagnosed with advanced lung cancer. Let's see how that works out. He's still doing his radio show almost every day. Still sounds great. I listened to him in the car this week. Net worth, $500 million. That's right. The dude's worth $500 million for talking on the radio. I mentioned Limbaugh was the second highest paid radio talk show host. The first, Howard Stern. The self-proclaimed king of all media. And by the way, you know where he got that term? It was kind of a goof. Remember when Michael Jackson, I don't know if they called him this or if he called himself this. I think he was given the moniker of the king of pop. And basically as a goof, Stern said, well, if Michael Jackson is the king of pop, I am the king of media. In fact, I am the king of all media. And by the way, officially, only he can call himself the king of all media because he's trademarked the moniker. He's the only one that can do it because he's got the trademark. He paid for it. But Howard Stern, Boston College graduate, he began his career in radio in 1976. By 1986, syndication began, and he had 20 million listeners in 60 markets at its peak. He won the Billboard Syndicated Personality of the Year 8 times in a row. 8 times in a row. And had the #1 morning show in New York City and Los Angeles simultaneously. Nobody's ever done that. Station owners have paid $2.5 million in FCC fines over stuff that Stern has said over the years. In fact, it's got him into trouble, a lot of trouble. But, again, the good ones toe that line. The good ones go right to the edge. The good ones have you listening to think, is he going to say this? Is he going to say that? And Stern not only is a good one, but arguably the best. In my opinion, the best at that genre. He's published 2 books, actually 3 books, Private Parts and Miss America. In fact, Private Parts, when he wrote that book, he knew it would be a #1 bestseller. He knew it would be the #1 book in the country. And he actually told his publisher that he wanted the book to be called Howard Stern's Penis. Now, the publisher said, we can't do that. So that's why they just called it Private Parts. And the reason Stern wanted the book to be called Howard Stern's Penis is because he wanted people to say, Howard Stern's penis is #1. That's the only reason he wanted the book to be called that. At least that's the story. He's got a 3rd book that just came out called Howard Stern Comes Again. Of course he's going to have a title like that. He got married into college and divorced 23 years later. Said he was consumed by work. That's why he divorced, because 24/7 was work, 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 work. He couldn't pay attention to family. He was divorced. Remarried in 2007, has a home in Southampton and a $53 million home in Palm Beach, Florida. Rush Limbaugh lives in Palm Beach, Florida. It's funny how all these guys live in Palm Beach, Florida. Practices transcendental meditation. In fact, he's done that for many, many years. Got his mother involved in it and says that TM was the reason his mother was able to beat her depression. He's a pescatarian, which is not quite a vegetarian. He eats fish, and he's had cosmetic surgery, which I find interesting. Why would somebody that's on the radio need cosmetic surgery? But he's had it. He sees a therapist on a regular basis. He's been fired multiple times for run-ins with management. Like I said, he was the #1 morning talk show in New York City between 1994 and 2001. He also got into television for a while. Maybe that's why he had the surgery, because he wanted to get into television. But he had a Fox pilot to replace Joan Rivers' failed talk show back in 1986. Filmed 5 one-hour pilots, but the show was not picked up by Fox because Fox called it boring, poorly produced, and in really bad taste. In 1990, he signed a 5-year, $10 million contract with Infinity Broadcasting. In 2000, signed 5 years, $100 million. So there you go. 10 years later, 10 times the contract. Lots of TV projects, lots of lawsuits against copycats. He's big on people stealing his intellectual property. Stern is very possessive of his intellectual property, and he should. Okay? He got tired of fighting with the FCC, so he went to satellite radio where he could say whatever he wanted. His first contract with the Sirius XM, 5 years, $500 million. And I thought to myself, that's ridiculous. Why would they pay him that money? Why would they pay him $500 million? Because at that time, Sirius XM was losing money. And one of their 2 satellites that was in the sky had fallen down. In other words, they only had one more. In other words, that orbit was going to only last so many years. And if the last satellite falls out of space, they can't broadcast. I thought they were foolish to pay Stern that kind of money. Obviously, that's why they do what they do, and that's why I do what I do. Stern was able to pick up lots and lots of subscribers. So Sirius XM, even though they paid Stern $500 million, they started making money because they got the subscribers. He was on America's Got Talent. Remember that show? You know how much they paid him? They paid him $50 million to be on that show. $50 million to be part of a panel once a week, 20 weeks a year. Howard Stern's net worth, $650 million. Don Imus. I did a radio show about Don Imus a couple months ago, maybe a month and a half ago. Remember that? It's when he died. But Imus, born in Riverside, California, to a wealthy family. In fact, his family owned a 35,000-acre ranch near Kingman, Arizona. So born in California, grew up on a ranch. That's why he always had the cowboy hat and all that kind of stuff. He didn't learn that in New York City. He dropped out of high school, joined the Marine Corps. He worked as a window dresser for a department store and started doing striptease acts with the mannequins, got fired. Then moved to Hollywood with his brother Fred, where they attempted to write and perform music. Nobody would buy it. Nobody would sign him. And he and Fred became homeless. They hitchhiked back to Arizona. He then worked for a railroad. He then worked in a uranium mine and thought, you know what? I'm going to try to get a job in radio. Entered a contest, won the contest, and got a job in Palmdale, California, starting in 1968. Full of pranks. In fact, pranks are what made Don Imus popular. In 1968, Eldridge Cleaver was on the run, a fugitive. So what did Imus do? He had an Eldridge Cleaver lookalike contest. He called the National Guard, or called the McDonald's, pretending to be a National Guard officer, and ordered 12,000 hamburgers. He started off with his characters. His first character was a televangelist called Billy James Hargis, which was a goof on a real live televangelist called Billy Sol Estes. Okay, so he was the fire and brimstone preacher, made everybody laugh. He was an instant success. Within 3 years, he was in New York City working for $100,000 a year. This was in 1971. $100,000 a year in 1971, folks, that was a lot of money. He also, while in New York City, became a stand-up comic. He got $10,000 a night as a stand-up comic. And he was an alcoholic and a cocaine addict. In fact, he took cocaine on a regular basis from 71 till 83, 12 years as a cocaine addict, but continued to drink, was married and divorced, and would always feud with Howard Stern. He and Howard Stern both worked for, I think it was WNBC. And there was a big argument. Who was going to be the morning guy? Who was going to be the afternoon guy? Well, Imus won out, became the morning guy. Stern and Imus, if they have one thing in common, It was egos. They both thought they had the biggest ego. And I'm not sure which one was correct. But basically, Stern got the afternoon slot. Imus got the morning slot, and they hated each other. In fact, Don Imus admitted he was a jerk during his drinking and drugging days. But at one time, he called Howard Stern a slut and a Jew bastard who should be castrated and put into an oven. Shock jocks tend to go over the edge. And Imus probably went over the edge more than anyone else. And that was both his success. It caused him to be successful, and it caused him the most amount of grief, I think, in his personal life as well as professional. In fact, some of the things that Imus said that went over the edge. Of course, his whole nappy-headed hose comment, where he called the girls from the Rutgers basketball team nappy-headed hose. He had done that with celebrities before, but you know what? These were just girls who played basketball. They weren't celebrities, so he stepped over the edge there. Pac-Man Jones, who was a football player who was constantly in trouble with the law. Basically, they were doing a story on Pac-Man Jones, and Imus says, well, what color is he? And they said, well, he's black. And Imus says, well, there you go. He was sued by Howie Carr, who was another New York City radio talk show host, who started talking about Carr's wife and a relationship with boxer Riddick Bowe, which was just total BS. Total Producer off air during a Mike Wallace interview basically said that Bernard McGurk, who was like his right-hand man, he says, I just hired that Bernard McGurk to do nigger jokes. He really said that. His words, not mine. Faggot, spear chucker, towel heads are terms he used on a regular basis on his show. And again, Imus was so popular because people listened to this stuff. And he was very, very racial. I don't think he was a racist, but I think he just said this stuff because that was his moniker. And he would say stuff sometimes that I thought, man, he's gone over the edge here, but I would laugh because the way he did it was funny. He had the Imus Ranch for Kids in New Mexico. Imus raised tens of millions of dollars for various charities. In and out of trouble with the FCC all the time. In and out of trouble with management all the time. In fact, he'd still be working up to the time that he died, but Cumulus basically told him, look, we're going to file bankruptcy, so we can't pay you anymore. I know what your contract says, but we're not going to pay you anymore because we're going to go bankrupt. Imus said, okay, time to quit, and he did. And he died about a year and a half later. At the time of his death, Don Imus was worth $75 million. Those are the big ones. Those are the big heavy hitters, the big 4, okay? But there's others as well. Tom Leykis. Many of you may not have heard of him. He was only in this market for a short amount of time. In fact, the old radio station, one of them where I used to work, KLPW, he was the afternoon guy on KLPW, actually syndicated on KLPW. That's how I became introduced to Tom Leykis, and that's how I found KLPW. Leykis was a New York City native with the New York accent. He moved to L.A., lost the accent because he realized, look, that's not how people should talk. Lost the accent, got into radio. Big time lawsuits. In fact, Tom Leykis had a lawsuit. A gal in Alaska sued him. Apparently, she called in his talk show host, and she sued him for libel. And Leykis insisted he did not libel this gal. Well, she sued him in Alaska, thinking, this guy's from California. He'll never come up to Alaska. He'll never show up in court, so I'll win the lawsuit. Leykis took his show to Juneau, Alaska, and did his show from Juneau for many, many months throughout the whole trial. And he won. Married and divorced 4 times. All these guys get married and divorced, okay? Tom Leykis, some of the things that made him popular, again, a shock jock, over the edge, or right up to the edge. He had Like Us 101. That was his moniker. That was his big moniker.